Hey, hello everybody, and welcome again. This is number 2 in the 5-part series on watercolor through Michael's Watercolor 101 is what we've called it. And this week is actually a little unique in that we've got, I'm doing this today, and then I'm doing another one tomorrow at the same time. And then Friday and Saturday will be another pair of back-to-back watercolor demonstrations. So if you like what you see and you want to come back for more, you've got lots of options this week as they've kind of saturated the airwaves with watercolor this week. The same thing will be happening next week. It'll be 2 on Monday, Tuesday, and then there'll be 1 towards the weekend. I think it's on a Friday. And then it goes back to sort of a normal schedule in in September. And that's when we'll switch it over to working in oils. So if you're interested in working in oils, that will be happening beginning in the first week in September. So there's a little precursor of what's to come. Okay, so today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend that we're out in the wilderness and we're working on a landscape. I actually have to work from a photograph for obvious reasons. Somewhere down the line, though, I do want to actually try and do something remote on location and do a plein air demonstration. But this one will be working from a photograph. It's a photograph I've taken and I've manipulated, but that's kind of the format today. You're welcome to work along with the image that I will have posted up on the little right-hand corner of the screen there. And you can do that, or if you've got your own photograph or a picture on a tablet or iPad or whatever, you can work from that as well. You'll sort of pick up the idea of what we're doing. As always, if you have questions as I'm going over things, something doesn't make sense, or if you want sort of a follow-up to something that I said, feel free to ask questions, and the moderator will be happy to interject and give me your question. Okay. So let's get right into it. Let's go to our supply list. Got to start with that. So this is the basic supplies that I've provided, and that set of three different trays of watercolors is more than enough watercolors. I mean, you always think that, but there's always one situation where it's like, oh, I wish I had this color. But if you've got the 3 primaries, red, yellow, and blue, and then a couple of earth tones, I believe I have raw umber and yellow ochre on here, and some paper towels and a small container for your water, that's going to be totally fine. You'll also need watercolor paper, ideally. That is a type of paper that's made specifically for watercolors. So they're really easy to find in a lot of different varieties and a lot of different price points. So I would say in the beginning, if you're just learning, get the cheaper stuff like the Strathmore pads, or I think Artist Loft might even have a brand as well. But as you get more comfortable, you can kind of up your game a little bit with spending more money. Fabriano papers, Aquarelle by I think it's, I can't remember the name, but there's lots of good ones out there that'll cost you a little bit more money, but you'll notice a difference. They do quite a good job. So that is our supply list. Like I said, if you don't have exactly what's on here, that is not the end of the world. I would encourage you to supplement with what you have. Sort of fill in the gaps and do what you need to do. This is just a sort of a starter point and a guide point. The brushes that I have right here, the middle, there's what I have 5 there. I've actually just got 4 of those, but those should be more than enough. If you've got more, if you've got less, as long as you have watercolor brushes, you're probably going to be fine. The biggest brush you'll probably need is that one that's on the right there on the supply list photograph, and that's a Filbert. And the others are sort of rounds, and I think that's everything. There's some flats. I don't really like to use flats in watercolor as much. I feel like the Filbert, which is sort of the rounded edge there, that works great for the kind of stuff we're going to do. Okay, so any questions about supplies real quick before we go on to the next bit about what we're going to actually do? Okay, so I want to talk briefly about I've decided to sort of go with landscape. I don't think I've done that yet in the month that I've been doing these. I certainly haven't done this before. And what I want to do is sort of play a little, pretend game here. Let's imagine we're all at this place and we can see this scene. And it's a good starting point. It's got sort of a nice center piece of, information there, this nice waterfall cutting through the middle of it. It's got sort of an even amount of sky and land. It's kind of broken up into three nice little sections down at the foreground, the middle ground, and the background where the waterfall is. If you're looking at the land, those three little slabs. But what I've done is I've sort of made some executive compositional decisions. And what I mean by that is I've cut it down. So you see, I've eliminated a lot of the sky. I've put the land as sort of the lower 2/3 of the entire composition there, and that's by intent. If you're familiar with photography or sort of design in general, the rule of thirds is sort of one of those universal compositional maxims that get thrown around, and dividing it up into thirds is sort of a good starting point. It's not going to solve all your problems. It's not going to create the most amazing painting every time, but it certainly will get you on the right footing. So I've just sort of divided this up so that instead of the land and the sky being kind of equal, I've made the land a little bit more prominent, occupying about 2/3 of the composition, and the sky doing the rest. The other thing that I've done is I've kind of divided it up into big sort of significant shapes here, by the sort of denoted by the red that goes around the clouds, and then the furthest mountain that you can see, and then there's even a little ribbon there for the waterfall, and then divided into that big shadowy area. And so this is kind of my last step in figuring out what my composition is. I start with the big picture and then break it down into, the basic, get the edges sorted out. And then from there, I sort of break it down into my main shapes. And that's really all you need to do in terms of getting a good composition up and running. And then what you see here is I've drawn basically those red outlines that I did. So I've got my composition kind of established in a very, very basic, in a basic way. There's no elaboration. I'm not doing any shading. I'm not doing any, drawing of little individual trees or anything like that. This is just big picture stuff. I have not stained my piece of paper, and that is intentional. I'm going to actually do that sort of in stages here. So I will get to that in a moment here. I'm going to close my window. My neighbor's kids are having a free-for-all over there, so I'll just do that really quick. All right. There we go. You might hear it in the background, but it won't be quite as bad. Okay, so this is my setup. I've got my brushes up here. So I'll just show you them up a little closer. This is the big Filbert. This is the biggest brush that I'm going to use. And you can see it's really big in terms of the size that I'm using. As far as the paper goes, I'm working fairly small because I wanted to sort of give you, a sort of look at everything that's in play here. So my Filbert is, that's a big brush for this size, but you'll see that you can get a good amount of information down with a big brush. My general observation is people tend to use brushes that are too small, and so something like this, and you're just trying to fill it in, and 25 minutes later you got half of the blue set up in here. whereas something like this will probably take you about 30 seconds. So don't be afraid of bigger brushes. You know, basically do as much as you can with as big a brush as you are able to use. And then you can always come down to these. And I've got other brushes in case there's something that's not quite in here. But these 4 should be plenty. My inclination is I'm probably not going to use this until the very end. So this is a brush that, if anything, gets overused, I would say, especially in watercolor. Okay, brushes. I've got my paints already poured out. I actually, if you were here last week, this is the same basic configuration of I've actually got quite a few blues over here. I've got an ultramarine blue, I've got a cobalt blue, I've got a cerulean blue. The skies can be tricky sometimes, so you want to have a few options up and running. I've got sort of a red and an orange, a dark red. Yellow is really kind of washed out. I'll try and clean that up here in a minute. And then where's my yellow ochre? Do I have my yellow ochre out? I've got a little bit of yellow ochre right here. That's always a good color. I'm actually going to get a little bit more. Sepia. No, it's sepia. This is what I used. Is that right? I can't remember which one it is. Well, I'll just put out yellow ochre no matter what. Where is it? It is right here. So I'll just take this out. Yellow ochre is a really nice kind of earthy yellow brown. And it's a really kind of very popular. Oh, there's a lot of, there we go. A lot of the medium has kind of separated from it. That happens a lot. That's actually a good thing to know about. Is I'll show you what I'm talking about. See how it's kind of separated? There's like this sort of, it's an egg white and egg yolk kind of look. The egg yolk being the pigment and the stuff on the side being the white. The stuff on the side, the egg white isn't going to do anything for you. It's really just it's basically like water. So it's not a bad thing. It's just, it's not going to give you any pigment. This is what you're going to be using. And if it separates like that, that usually happens either as a paint gets older or when it's brand new. So this is a brand new tube or newish, and it sort of separates. So if you just take it and kind of squeeze it back and forth, that can often mix it up enough so that you can get the desired amount of pigment that you need. So if that happens, and it happens to me quite a bit, it happens with oil paints as well. I mean, don't do it so much that you start, creating a crease and it leaks out all over the place. If you just do it, 10 times, 20 times, something like that, just sort of to get it mixed up, that will often do the trick. But I got enough there, so we should be fine. Okay, so we got everything set up. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to start on a landscape. You're dealing with natural light, unless you're doing a night painting, which is really hard to do, especially on site. But during the day, under normal light conditions, light is warm. So just remember that. And I like to start by just giving myself a little bit of that light and that warmth, and giving it a little foothold here that we sort of work through. So what I'm doing here is I'm just pre-wetting. If you remember, if you were here last week, I did what was the name? Emil Nolde, and it's sort of a wet into wet approach. So I'm going to do that here, and I'm just going to take that yellow ochre straight up. I'm not trying to match a color so much as I am just trying to get a general kind of feeling and overall sense of warmth. So I'm just kind of really loosely applying an overall color here. And even into the, the waterfall area, even into the dark area. And most of this down here is going to get covered up. I'm not worried about that because it's a pretty light, not very powerful color. So it's going to be easy to cover it up and make it a little bit, sort of subvert it, push it back into the background a little bit. And if I wanted to, I could put a little bit of that warmth up here. I'll just take some of this. Do that more for the clouds than anything. So I'm just kind of giving it an overall wash here. And now a question that I often ask myself as I'm working along here, it's like, all right, where do I go now? I've sort of warmed it up. I've sort of given it an overall temperature. What's my biggest area? What's my biggest shape? And I think pretty much most of us will agree that the sky takes up a lot of space, the blue of the sky specifically. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm still using my big brush here. And if you're worried about it, you know, that yellow kind of contaminating, that's why you have your little towel here. I've got a whole roll of them over there, but I'll just
Mike.
Yeah.
So we've got Cindy who wants to know, what do you do if your paint is too thick?
If your paint is too thick, this is watercolor, so douse it with water. Just do more water. And then just a little dab. I mean, I'll just show you the kind of the concentration I was using. I loaded this brush up with water, pretty much, got a little bit of it out, and then just a little dab. And that's more than enough to give me sort of the soft little underlying effect that I'm after, the sort of the warming up of the whole page. So you don't need a lot. I mean, that's actually a really good question. And it's a really common mistake that people make, is they kind of treat it like acrylics. They go, oh, look at all that paint. And they'll just scoop it up and put it on there. And you're basically doing an acrylic painting or equivalent to it with that really heavy paint. The quality of watercolor that you don't want to get rid of, generally speaking, it's a reason why people work in watercolor, is you don't want that paint to be really thick, especially in the beginning. I mean, a good general rule of thumb with watercolor is you work from light to dark, thin to thick. That's a good overall with acrylics and oil paintings as well. Work from less to more. So really, really thin coats. This is actually got a pretty good brightness to it down here, but I'm going to add a lot more paint here in a minute. So yeah, that was a great question. Thank you for that. All right, so now I'm going to start with some of the blue, and I'm probably going to go a little bit heavier, and I'm going to start with cerulean blue. Cerulean blue is a little bit lighter, but it's a great color for skies. And this is already a little damp, but it's kind of drying out a little bit. So I'm going to come in here and kind of pre-wet it with kind of a light coat, and maybe even not so much pigment. And skies are great for watercolor because, you know, there's never a sky that's like solid blue. Photography tends to do that. If you look in the photograph over here, it kind of makes it look all uniformly blue, but there's little clouds coming through and, breaking up the overwhelming sense of blueness, I guess you could call it. And watercolor really sort of lends itself to kind of that nice general watery aqueous sense of color that we're gonna be shooting for with this. So I'm just gonna really load this up with water here. This is really light, and that's totally fine because I'm going to add a lot more pigment here. And then I'm just going to let that water sort of do its thing, sort of keeping with the outlines of the different cloud shapes that I've established already. Just kind of building it up. Maybe I'll just throw in another blue here just to see what happens. Not trying to go too much, not scooping that paint up. And just, I find myself dabbing more than I actually, paint when I'm working in watercolors. It's more about getting the water where you want the paint to go, and then letting that paint just sort of fill in the shapes that you've already established with the water. So I'm using that as a little bit of a guide, like so. Going back to the cerulean a little bit. I got a little bit of the yellow. See, this yellow is kind of leaked into my cerulean a little bit. If that happens, you can just take a paper towel and kind of bridge the gap or put a dam in between it. You know, it's the little Dutch boy holding the dam up. So that prevents, if there's no water going in between those two, then they won't mix. Same thing with what's happening on your paper. So now that I think I've repaired that, I can go back to this a little bit more. Let's see here. I also have this picture over here in a hard copy in a much bigger version up to my right as I'm looking. So I have a much better view of it. That's something that, you know, if you work from source material other than, you know, looking directly at from life, you know, having an iPad or having a photograph or a printout or something of it like that is a good idea. So you don't have a headache from straining so much at the end. Okay, that's fairly light. This is probably going to get a little bit darker, but that's good enough for the time being. I do probably want to dry some of this out a little bit.
Hey, Mike, can you say again how big that piece of paper is, the dimensions of it?
I think it's about like 6 by 8 or something like that.
Okay.
It's basically in your sort of classic rectangular, you know, a 9 by 12 would be the same, what's called aspect ratio. So yeah, it's pretty small. So I'm just making it so that if I start working in here, it doesn't bleed up into there and vice versa. I'm actually going to come in here with a smaller brush and try and get a little bit of that edge established. And then I'm losing some of the clouds right here. So I'll just take this, kind of blot it out. This is a great way to actually make clouds. It's just, you know, while it's still wet and damp, you can kind of pull those shapes out a little bit more fully. And then when you feel like you've got them, you can kind of come back and maybe define the edges a little bit. I'll just build that up a bit. Like so. So I'm using a mix of blues here, and I'm using like there's going to be some, you know, stronger blues and a little bit more light and fluid blues. So it's, you know, it's not about coloring it in and making it perfectly even. All right, so I'm adding a little ultramarine blue. So I've got like cobalt blue and cerulean blue and ultramarine blue, kind of using them interchangeably, knowing that the sky is not a universal color or value. Just trying to keep it more interesting to look at. Kind of lost a little bit of this one. I'll maybe pull that out a little bit. The paper towel is your friend in watercolor. It's always at my side, always, you know, ready to go if something goes sideways. As long as everything's still damp, you can use the paper towel immediately. And even if it dries and you go, oh, I want to, you know, sort of change that or you know, lighten that, darken that, whatever, you can come back to it, reactivate it, and go back and work on it again. All right, so now I'm going to start getting a little bit more particular with my values, sort of building it up. So you can see that light to dark thing coming into play here. I'm starting to kind of intensify my color, add some more blues.
So what would you say is the right amount of wetness on the brush?
Oh, it entirely depends upon what you're doing, and it changes minute by minute as you're working. I would say if you dip it in and then just sort of let a little bit drop off, or even just dab it a couple times and then go to the paint, that's a good place to start. But in these early stages, I would say err on the side of a little bit too much water rather than too much pigment. You don't want to go too heavy too soon, because you'll always be working against that and just trying to get some of that back. So these are kind of nice for those kind of half wispy clouds that are in this little setup.
So you can always add more color.
Yeah, you can always add more, and you can always take it away, but it's easier on the paper if you don't do a lot of kind of dabbing and going back and correcting and abrading the paper. I mean, the more contact your brush has with the paper, the more likely it is to sort of turn into toilet paper and kind of get really not good, just sort of flaking off, and it'll start to disintegrate and not do things that you want watercolor paper to do.
It would be really expensive toilet paper.
It would.
You're using the Artist Loft watercolor paper?
No, I'm actually using some leftover stuff that I have. But I believe Artist Loft has their own brand, and usually those are that's a good place to start, is sort of start with the home brand, because if you're buying something from a company like Winsor Newton or whatever, they have to spend a lot of money advertising and things like that. So the expense gets a little bit higher with those name brand stuff. I often look for the brand that's sold by Michael's or whatever art store that I might be in, and they tend to be pretty good quality and a little bit cheaper, and that's always my bottom line. I know how good I want it to be, but I also don't want to spend too much money if I can avoid it. Okay, so I'm going to move on. I spent a lot of time on that. I'm just going to maybe add a little bit of sort of slight gray. All right, so that's a good place to move on from. All right, so now I'm going to move into this area. You can kind of work in any configuration that you want. I may actually go down here because I want this edge to dry, and I don't want these kind of cross-pollinating too much in the beginning. So I may, and I want to bring this nice little warm peak. Yeah. Oh, look at that. That came right out. That's nice. So this warm little orange peak, sort of orangish yellow. And I was still able to dab that out. So that's great. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in here, and I may actually start, and I'm going to go back to my big brush. I may actually start with a blue, because eventually it's going to get sort of this gray green. And this is, there's many philosophies about how to mix color in watercolor. And I'm going to do sort of the incremental approach, just sort of start with a blue and then, maybe add some yellow and kind of build it up like that. But I just want to establish, so I'm using I believe this is Ultramarine blue, and I'm just going to establish this nice dark edge here. And just kind of get a little dark edge, because this dark to light is really kind of a big piece of the puzzle here. And I'm just going to load up that edge. I may throw in a little bit of this earthy brown here just to kind of kill the blueness a little bit, but really concentrating on that nice dark edge. Not trying to make it, once again, uniformly one color, because watercolor, one of the great things about watercolor is it will integrate different colors and different shapes and it'll do the work for you. So I'm not trying to, be monolithic about my shadow here. I'm just kind of establishing the shape. So a little bit more of this blue. Howie 12. There we go. Now, once again, now this is all wet and it's all relatively dark. So I'm just going to throw in, what am I going to use here? What is this color? This looks good. This is sort of a brown, and I'm just going to mix that with the blue up here. So, I started with the blue, and now I'm going to kind of dull it up a little bit. So the blueness is there. The cool blue, think blue as cool, and cool colors tend to sort of sit back in space and frame the warm colors, and that's exactly what's happening here. This is kind of going to be the centerpiece. All of this warm lit up center mountain.
So is the brown the raw umber?
The brown is actually, I think I'm using a Van Dyke brown, but raw umber would work perfectly for this. Van Dyke brown and raw umber are very similar. And I'm gonna go back and forth and mix some of the blue and some of the brown together. Let's see if I can get a little closer. There we go. Let's try that. And then down on the bottom edge, as I'm looking at my bigger copy, I kind of see there's always a shadow where one shape meets another. So this nice kind of dark edge is something that I'm gonna highlight. And then there's tons of texture in here. So I'm just gonna start dabbing in some different things. I'm gonna throw some yellow in here, get this a little bit more of a bright green, see how that looks. Just kind of experiment a little bit. I kind of like that. Once again, the water is kind of doing the work for me. So I've got this sort of triad of kind of blue, and then a blue-brown mix, and then this kind of more green. I'm kind of liking that as my palette for this particular shape here. Maybe throw some of this yellow ochre in there, see how that looks. Not so keen on that one. All right. If you don't like it, you can always dab it up, but I'm not going to dab it up. I'm just going to put some of that blue in there. See how that works. It's getting a little heavy and a little bit too much. So I'm just going to go a little bit more water. But you can kind of see this little, let me just get you down here closer. This little yellow ochre, more of a true green, I guess you could say, that sort of blue edge. So there's quite a bit going on color-wise in basically an overwhelmingly dark shape. So now I'm going to come back with straight blue and see how that looks. But the overall idea here is this is dark, it's cool, it's kind of working as a way to frame the viewer's eye into, look here, this is where the action is, this is where the kind of the highlight and the light is. Keep your eye there. I'm also going to, at this point, just kind of darken this whole area a little bit, and I'm going to probably darken it a little bit more with brown because this is kind of ground area. So I'll just do a little cerulean blue, which is a lighter blue, and some yellow ochre. Come on. Cerulean doesn't want to play. I'll go to cobalt and see. That's a little bit too much blue. All right, let's try that. I think that's good. That's that's more of an earthy color than a green color, which is kind of what I'm after. I want these are both in shadow, these two areas here. That's maybe not quite warm enough. I can fix that. Just going to keep this edge intact because I don't want them to bleed into each other too much. That probably needs to get a little bit, well, it's pretty close. It's actually pretty good. We'll just leave it like that. Let's see how that goes. All right. And now I'm going to proceed into this middle area here. And this is all about making this waterfall kind of pop out and do something interesting. So this is going to be a little bit of a different approach. I'm not going to be quite as watery. I'm not going to be quite as loose here. I'm probably going to be a little bit tighter. You've got a lot of darker pieces of the mountainside here that are going to highlight some other pieces and create some starker edges. So let me see, getting the color on this one is going to be really a little bit tricky here because you've got a lot of blue in here, and I don't want this to be too blue. I don't want it to be the same as this. So I might try something that's going to warm it up a little bit. So I'll put some of that brown in. I still want blue because the blue is going to give it the darkness. So that's looking sort of along the lines of what I want. Let me just go ahead and I don't really want to do this. This is going to be, you know what? I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to go, see, I was starting to, you've got to check your choices here. I was going to come in and sort of do some of these dark, a little bit more detailed stuff. Generally speaking, in watercolor, it's best to do your detailed stuff at the end. Do the hard edges, do the real strong darks, do the real strong lights. Wait till the end. So I'm going to take my own advice and come in here and just do sort of a nice kind of yellow-green wash. There's a fair amount of that happening over here. And I'm making it purposely lighter. Got to watch that edge. There's a lot of really kind of active wet areas, so you got to keep your eye on that. This is sort of foliage pouring down that mountainside. Actually, this looks pretty good. I feel like I got that one pretty good. It's lighter than I want, but that's actually at this stage, that's where I want to be. You want to be lighter than where you're going to end up, as I mentioned earlier. So I'm just kind of throwing a little bit of this green in here. This is like purple, this edge up here. So now I'm just going to wet it a little bit more and just kind of add a little. There's a lot going on in here. There's purples and grays and almost some oranges. Not the fruit, the color. There we go. I'm going to pull in some more brighter yellows here because down here there's some real nice warmth. That looks pretty good. This is definitely a painting that you could spend a lot of time on if you really wanted to build up the mosaic of how this works. Tomorrow, next class, I'm gonna work with an artist, Andrew Wyeth. He's a pretty famous guy, and he does a lot of dry brush techniques. This would actually be a fairly good one to practice some of that on. So I'm just adding a tiny tint of red to this yellow ochre because I see a little bit of sort of pinky stuff. That's probably a little bit too much pigment, need more water. So I'll just, and then I'm letting some of this combine. Yeah, it seems pretty good. And then I've got sort of some purple rocks in there. It's kind of a lot going on. So I'll just take some of that. See how that looks. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So I got greens, I got oranges, I've got some of this purpley brown, all sorts of little things. It's really hard to sort of pick up. I'm trying to be pretty naturalistic about my color. In other words, I'm trying to match it, get the color that I'm seeing. Sometimes, like if you remember from Emil Nolde, he was not too concerned with getting the color exactly right. It was more sort of an expressive vehicle for him to sort of make some decisions based on feelings and correlation between a color and what it means to the artist. So I don't know where that came a little bit heavy. That's all right, actually. Actually going to start with this. I'm going to lay this purple in here. You can see I'm kind of reacting to the color that I'm using. Like that was like, oh, that's interesting. That maybe could be handy up here. Just trying to get a little bit of that blue green. Let's see how that works.
Can you tell us what size brush you're using now?
Yeah, this is a size 6 round.
Okay.
And it's great. It's doing exactly what I want it to do. I'm getting a fair amount of detail with it. But it's also, it's got enough heft to it that I can really load it up if I want to. All right, so now I'm starting to get a little bit darker with some of this. I mean, if you've seen my other demos, you'll know that I'm a real strong advocate of getting your values right, your darks and lights, your shading. So I'm really trying to establish that and use that as sort of my template of where I go next. Because if I don't have the values right, the colors aren't really going to matter. I mean, it does, but it's not as important as getting those values coordinated. All right. So adding a little bit of this green, this nice little green that I've stumbled upon. That's often how color works. It's like, oh, I didn't know there was purple in that color, but lo and behold, there is. This is all, I'm sort of upping the intensity of these colors a little bit. So this is a little bit more green than what I'm seeing. And that's absolutely your choice to kind of make those decisions. It does not have to be precise. There's a lot of this sort of gray color in here, so I'm going to kind of block that in. So I'm working, I did a little bit of detail, but now I'm kind of going back to the overall picture, the prevailing color scheme, and trying to get that worked in here as well. A little bit more of this darker color, which is
Wilma
also...
wants to know, is it important to let an area dry before you go back over it again?
Well, it can be very important. As long as you know, the worst thing you can do is you just go into an area and not know what the status of another area is, and they start bleeding, and then you kind of got to do repair work. I would say just know what you want to do with the marks that you're trying to make, and then how that's going to react with the area. Like I'm really trying to avoid this edge because there's a lot of water here. There's a lot of pigment. And if I get too close to this, it's going to bleed in there. So that's an area where I want to avoid. So I'm really trying to strategically move my way around. And that is often the most frustrating part of watercolor is you get the color right, you start mopping it in, and then boom, it just sort of bleeds in from another area, and you're kind of at square one in terms of having to start over, like blot it out and do the repair work. So it's really important, and knowing what's going to happen before it happens is a nice little feature of practicing with this medium. Just getting more familiar with it. I hope that answered your question, because it is a really important question. Okay, so I've kind of established this. I'm really getting the sense of the light hitting that wall and this being a shadow, and that works pretty well. So I'm in pretty good overall shape, I think. I've got about 13 minutes left, so I want to add a little bit more detail. I mean, normally this would probably be if I had an hour and a half demo. I'd say, all right, everybody go get a snack and we'll meet back here in 5 minutes and I'll let this dry. I don't have that time, so I'm just going to dive right into it. And I think I'll be fine. But there may be a little bit of what I just talked about in terms of, you know, it's not quite dry enough. And that's a real issue with watercolor. If you go too soon, you know, it might not work out the way you want it to. But I'll have my paper towel ready. And this is another, you know, this is another challenge of what's called plein air painting. Is, you know, if you're out in the landscape, you know, things are changing rapidly. The light's changing. You know, you often don't have that liberty of doing a little break and letting things dry. So you kind of have to just make it work. I probably put a little bit too much water in here. This is really taking a long time to dry this corner. It's going to be nice and dark, but it's a situation where I probably could have gotten away with a little bit less. And now what I'm doing here is I'm really creating this hard edge, trying to establish a little bit more detail and separation between the land and the sky in this particular instance. Let's see. Okay, I'll get this nice edge here. But this is pretty dry, so that color, you can see it's going right to the edge. So it's doing actually exactly what I want it to do. So it sometimes pays to be able to just blather on. It allows the paint to dry. There's a method to this madness. And what I'm going to do, there's a little bit of blending from this shape in here. So I'm going to kind of let these two creep together a little bit. We'll just kind of unite them. Maybe do that right along here as well. So now it's starting to dry a little bit more. And that's to my advantage. I got these real nice dark kind of hanging garden effects throughout this area. This color is going to serve me well, I think. Almost comes down to this one. I'm going to pull a little bit of this. See, this is where you can kind of get things working to your advantage. I'm taking a little bit of that warmth here and then taking a little bit more of this darkness here and maybe combining these two, you know, that area and that area. Not too much pigment on here. So this is still wet. So, you know, it starts off dark, but then it quickly fades. I'm going to go somewhere else where it's a little drier and that color kind of stays put a little bit. Don't be afraid to mix it up. If you see something happening over here, wasn't quite doing what I wanted it to, wasn't quite being as definitive and sharp, there's usually a place somewhere else that will get you where you want to go. All right, I'm gonna wrap this up fairly soon. I want to see what people have been up to. Yeah, so tomorrow's demo is actually going to be a really nice segue because I'm doing a lot of what I will be concentrating on Tuesday, and that is kind of a lot of real strong detailed work, dry brushing, things like that. I'm going to go back to this edge here and try to make this even a little bit more dark.
So can you tell us which colors you're using now?
Right now?
Yeah.
I'm going back to the blues. Hopefully I didn't jump to something too quickly. And I'm just trying to make kind of this dark edge a little bit more pronounced.
Okay.
So it's a series of blues: ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, and then I'm using that Van Dyke brown, that sort of dark brown. Raw umber would also work perfectly for what I'm doing right now. Just trying to really define that edge, that dark edge. And you can
Allie
see,
wants to know which Wyeth painting you're going to use. I have a feeling she probably wants to draw it beforehand.
oh, I'm actually not going to use a specific Wyeth. I'm going to show you a bunch, but I'm going to paint an apple in stylistically the way that Wyeth did it. But if you want to get a painting of Wyeth's that you like, one, make sure it's a watercolor because he did lots of different mediums. And I would recommend getting a close-up of it. Like, you know, if you're going to draw like one of his portraits, maybe just concentrate on an eye or a cheek or something like that, because we're really going to concentrate on working in a dry brush method. Let's see here. Yeah, just really building that, getting a sense of these trees being right up against that. I would probably, I mean, if I had more time, I'd probably come in here and do a little bit more of this to kind of pull some of these real dark, sort of shadowy areas into focus. But I think the overall sensation is there for what's happening. And this edge is nice, and I can kind of fill that in. All right, almost there. Got a few minutes left to look at other people's. There we go. Maybe establishing a little bit more definition over here. Just dabbing, you know, I'm not drawing a tree with little leaves on it and stuff like that. It's just kind of creating texture more than anything else. And using, as I'm going along, using less water and more pigment, so the shapes are a little bit more, and the marks that I'm making are a little bit more defined, a little more hard-edged.
Is that masking tape around the edge?
It is masking tape around the edge. That's a really good question that I did not elaborate on. I never, ever do watercolor without it being attached either through tape or glue or something to a board, or it's part of a watercolor pad that's, or it's what are they called? I forget the name of them, but they're, you know, they're glued together and you can just peel them off as you use them. Those are great. So yeah, it's a really, really important feature of watercolor, is to sort of tie things down, tape things down, so that they don't, so the paper doesn't warp and you get these little puddles. Okay, let's do a little bit. See how it kind of bled? This is a little bit of bleeding happening here. This was me being a little bit of a rush, doing a little bit of a rush job, but I think I could probably make that work.
So we did have someone ask if you've ever used like a blow dryer or something.
You can use a blow dryer. If you go into like you know, an art school or whatever, and there's watercolor being taught in a particular room, they will almost always have that on hand. All right, so now one last thing here. Let me just define this. And you notice I haven't done anything in here. I just want to define that edge. And this might be a situation where I could even go smaller. It's really, and now I'm just going to go a little bit lighter with some of this. That's a bit much, but I can fix that with my rag. Pull some of that down, use some of this existing paint. I do this all the time, so I'll just take a little section and And then you just come in here, just add a few more little dabs of foliage that are clinging to the mountainside desperately. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there because I want to see what other people are up to. Okay, so I would probably add a little bit more detail in here, probably come in and fiddle around with this some more, but I think I got pretty much the basic shapes established. Let's get a longer view here.
If their waterfall is yellow, can they fix that?
Yeah, and the way to do that, if you ever want to correct things, you can just take a brush, completely clean brush, get it wet, and just kind of open it up, the area that you want to get rid of, and just kind of go back and forth. I'll just do it here, even though I don't have, sort of go back and forth like this, and then get your paper towel and just dab that area, and it'll get pretty close to where you were with it, which is white. Yeah. Okay. So let's have a look at a few. We got a couple minutes left. Who's got some stuff we can look at? Who wants to hold it up? The moderator will highlight you when you hold it up there. Let's take a look. Oh, all right. So who we got here? Marcia. All right. You got the nice dark and light. Yep. All right. Good, good, good. That looks good. Yeah, just keep building up. I'm looking at Layla Sims. Yeah, just keep building up the light areas and the dark areas to really highlight that separation between light and dark. Yeah, that looks great. Mary's iPad. What a strange name. That looks great. Allie, all right, good. Yeah, you got a lot of nice texture in that middle area there. Just punch up the dark there to really frame that nice lit up mountainside, and then you're in business. That looks great. Yeah, good. Stella, very nice, very nice. Yeah, the areas in the light area, in that middle section, in that mountain section, they're going to have more intense, bright, warm colors. Everything else is going to be, that shadow is going to be darker. It's going to be cooler. So if you keep that separation, that's great. Taylor, that looks awesome. That's the idea. That nice blue. Yep. Yep. Just add some more. This is Phyllis. Yeah, add some more blue into that foreground shadow, and that light will really pop out. Good. Holly, nice. Good. Yeah, you really up the warmth of that middle section. That's great. That's a good idea. Excellent. Charmini. All right. Yeah. See the nice from sky to middle ground to bottom. It's blue, warm middle, blue on the bottom. Okay, Nico. Yeah, good. Just punch up that dark in the foreground there, Nico, and you are in great shape. Yeah. Susan, yep, that's the idea. Blue, warm blue. It's sort of a nice little pattern that you can keep track of things. Yeah. Josie, yeah, that looks great, Josie. That's exactly the idea. That real nice dark in the foreground is really framing everything else. Yeah, cool. Shulamit. Oh, you did your own. Nice. Or a very liberal version of what we did. You went wide. Yeah, all right, cool. Renata, excellent. I liked how a lot of people sort of went a little bit more bold and expressive with the color, not quite as sort of realistic or yeah, Carol. All right, good. Yeah, get those darks a little darker in the foreground, and that center ground will pop right out. Dawn, excellent. Great. The texture in that middle ground looks really good, Dawn. Karen, good. You got the strong dark in that foreground up and running. Keep punching that up. It's going to give it that sense of space, because if everything's sort of the same value, it's all going to look flat, and you want things to kind of proceed from, especially in landscape, foreground, middle ground, background, give it that sense of deep space, and that those value shifts will do that. Yeah, Michelle, that's the idea. That's exactly what we're looking for. And you kept that middle area nice and warm. So that's perfect. Cool. Sarah Rodriguez, that looks awesome. Yeah, I really like the sky, how you kind of modulated a lot of different colors in there. That looks good. Oh, whoa, got a whole table full there, Julia. Julia and assistant. Not assistant, she's doing her own thing. Nicely done. Lizzie, all right, yeah. See how that nice warm yellow really pops out? Just with the blue there. I mean, if you push that blue even darker, that yellow is gonna really pop out. It's gonna look like, you know, that strong afternoon light. Yeah, awesome. Cool, these look great. Excellent. Ashley. Yeah, you sort of went earth tone there. That looks great. Sort of a lot of umbers and Van Dyke browns and a little yellow ochre in there. Yeah, it's a good mix. Sally, yep. Yeah, and you can see when it's wet like that, you can kind of just keep adding, and that will sort of beef up the texture, and you'll get lots of you know, things that watercolor will do the work for you. Yeah, Fran. Yeah, it looks great. That real nice earthy middle tone looks really good against that blue. Yeah, same for Ahmed. That sort of a yellow green you went with, that looks good. Yeah, all the ones that really pop out are when you've got that sort of that warm middle tone in through that middle ground, and that dark, like this one here, this is Sandy, and that dark foreground, it sort of really accents. Patricia, you have a very nice light on your roof. Okay, Vicky. Oh yeah, Vicky, there you go. It's sort of more of a stronger yellow. I like that. So I mean, that's another thing too, is you can start with, you can kind of be over the top with your color in the beginning, and then kind of tone it down as you go along. All right. Very cool. That's sort of more of an overall cool tone for the whole thing. That looks great. Good. Yee, very nice. Yeah, that nice yellow. I mean, you see how that yellow really, it immediately makes you think of sunlight. You think about, you know, sort of direct afternoon, warm, radiant light. Good, Lou. Yeah, you went straight blue with that foreground. That worked out well. Good. All right, Laura. Yeah, get some of those darks in that foreground. Okay, Pat. Yeah, nice. Lots of willing. Oh, this is like a two-parter. Marcia. Are these two different people, or is this two different versions? Yeah, it looks good. Amy. Yeah, nice. That nice big saturated yellow. I like this. I like the sort of the yellow in the sky as well. Oh yeah, that's very nice. Susan. Yep, you went more Emil Nolda. You went sort of expressive color, sort of a Van Gogh approach in terms of your color. Sarah Katzen, yeah, that looks great. You had your own beach scene. Nice. Good separation between warm and cool colors. Yeah. Gidget. Okay, cool. Got that sort of yellow green. There's been a few people that have done sort of more of the yellow green with that middle tone. That looks good as well. Sort of ties it to that blue a little bit. Elena. Very nice. Oh, I like, what's that border? That's intense. Is that your own design? All right, Irma, nice. Cool. And AJ, yeah, very nice. Excellent work. That's sort of more of a green, almost a straight green in that middle ground. And then Linda, yep, nice dark foreground. It's sort of, think of it like a frame, like when you go to, if you ever go to the theater, you know, the frame of the curtains, same idea. It directs you to looking at what the playwright wants you to look at, which is the action on the stage. That's the same idea. Yeah, Linda, that's, yeah, that nice dark. Very cool.
That's
Okay.
everybody.
Yeah, that was awesome. Did we get everybody? That looked pretty comprehensive.
So.
I may actually keep this one on hand because this is a good one. Like if I kind of run my course with what I'm planning on doing tomorrow, I may apply some of the, what's his name? Wyeth, some of the Wyeth techniques, the dry brush techniques onto this one, because it's kind of at that stage where I would be ready to come in with a little bit more precise, and it will be dry tomorrow. So hopefully I will see you, some of you tomorrow. That was great. Thank you all for following along, and hopefully I'll see you tomorrow. Great job, everybody. Bye-bye.